When the 1940s began, Britain was cornered. The Blitz pounded cities nightly. The Luftwaffe seemed unstoppable. The Royal Air Force needed more than defense. It needed reach. The twin-engine bombers then in service couldn't carry enough explosives or fly far enough to hurt Germany's war machine. Engineer Roy Chadwick at Avro in Manchester was already working on an aircraft called the Manchester. It had promise, but its unreliable Vulture engines doomed it to failure. Chadwick refused to give up. He and his team tore the design apart, lengthened the wings, fitted 4 proven Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, and simplified everything that had caused trouble. The result first flew in January 1941, the Avro Type 683 Lancaster. Test pilot H.A. Bill Thorne lifted it from the runway at Ringway and found it astonishingly smooth, stable, and easy to fly. A giant that handled like a fighter. Its secret was balance. A huge bomb bay running almost the full length of the fuselage, perfectly aligned with the center of gravity. It could carry any load engineers imagined, and soon would. Production began immediately. Avro factories at Chatterton and Yeadon roared to life, joined by Vickers and Armstrong Whitworth. Thousands of workers, many of them women, built wings, control surfaces, and the great center fuselage sections that would become Britain's most important bomber. Each aircraft was assembled by hand. Riveters worked through the night while sirens wailed outside. In those sheds, surrounded by blackout curtains and the smell of oil and aluminum, the Lancaster was born. The first squadrons received their aircraft in early 1942. Crews were astonished by what they found: power, stability, and room to spare. The cockpit stood high, giving a commanding view. Behind the pilot were positions for 6 more men: flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, and rear gunner. 7 lives bound together in a metal shell. Training was relentless. The bomber was larger than anything most pilots had ever handled, yet forgiving when flown correctly. Takeoff required every bit of the 4 Merlin's 6,000 combined horsepower, but once airborne, it felt light and responsive. The Lancaster could haul 14,000 pounds of bombs at 280 miles per hour, climbing to 20,000 feet. It outcarried every Allied bomber then flying. By mid-1942, Bomber Command finally possessed the tool it needed to strike deep into occupied Europe. That summer, the first night raids began, small probing missions to test navigation and radar. The results were promising. Accuracy improved, losses fell, confidence rose. In the blackness over the continent, the 4 engine silhouettes became a new symbol of defiance. Germans called them Die schwarzen Vögel, the blackbirds. The Avro Lancaster had arrived, and with it came a new phase of the air war. Britain's transformation from the bombed to the bomber. By 1942, the Lancaster had become the backbone of Bomber Command, and Britain was ready to strike back. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, newly appointed Commander-in-Chief, believed that concentrated bombing could cripple Germany's industry and morale. His plan was audacious: fill the night sky with aircraft until it became a storm of fire. On the 30th of May, 1942, the world saw the first 1,000 bomber raid. Nearly half of those aircraft were Lancasters. Engines shook the airfields across Lincolnshire and Yorkshire. Villages went dark as power was diverted to the bases. Ground crews worked by torchlight, loading incendiaries and high-explosive blocks into the cavernous bomb bays. At 22:30, Wave after wave rolled down the runways. Observers on the ground said it sounded like the sky itself was moving. Over Cologne, searchlights crossed, flak burst like white flowers, and the first Lancaster crews experienced the full chaos of a major raid. They flew in darkness, guided only by compasses and the new G navigation beacons. Inside, the cockpit was cramped and noisy. The pilot gripped the yoke. The engineer watched fuel gauges. The navigator bent over maps under a red lamp, and the rear gunner scanned the tail for night fighters. Every man knew that one mistake, a frozen control, a burst of flak, meant a fireball in the dark. Losses were heavy, but the results stunned Germany. Cologne burned for days, and for the first time, civilians in the Reich saw a bombing campaign of industrial scale. The Lancaster had proved it could deliver destruction deep into enemy territory. Through 1943, the bomber offensive grew. Crews flew to Essen, Hamburg, and Berlin, missions lasting 7 or 8 hours. They took off at dusk and returned at dawn, exhausted and half-deaf. Each trip meant threading through radar-guided searchlights, night fighters, and flak belts. Survival odds hovered around 80% per mission, but after 20 trips, the mathematics turned cruel. Still, they went. Pilots named their aircraft S. Sugar, Just Jane, Phantom of the Ruhr. Ground crews painted mission symbols on the nose, tiny bombs marching across the fuselage. Each new mark meant another night survived. By mid-1943, more than 20 Lancaster squadrons were in constant action. New radar, the H-2S system, showed towns as bright blips on a circular screen. For the first time, navigators could find targets through cloud. Technological evolution and human endurance were now working together. The bomber offensive had become Britain's primary weapon of retaliation. And at the center of it all, the steady roar of 4 Merlins pulling one aircraft through the dark. For the young men inside, the Lancaster was both sword and shield. They trusted it completely, even when everything else around them burned. By 1943, the Lancaster had become more than a bomber. It was a platform for invention. Engineers and air crews began to test the limits of what its vast bomb bay could carry. Inside those workshops, new weapons and new ideas took shape. Among the minds behind them was Barnes Wallis, a soft-spoken engineer who refused to believe that random area bombing would end the war. He envisioned targets struck with surgical accuracy, bridges, dams, submarine pens, places that truly sustained the German war machine. To do it, he designed something the world had never seen, a bouncing bomb. It looked like a metal barrel, but when dropped at low altitude and high speed, it skipped across the surface of a reservoir like a stone, struck the dam wall, and detonated underwater. Only one aircraft could carry it. The Lancaster, stripped of armor and gun turrets to save weight. A new unit, number 617 Squadron, was formed to carry out the mission. On the night of the 16th to the 17th of May, 1943, 19 Lancasters lifted off from Scampton in Lincolnshire. Their target? The great dams of the Ruhr Valley. They flew at treetop height, guided by moonlight and stopwatches. Searchlights and flak tore the sky. Some aircraft were lost before reaching the target. But over the Möhne and Eder dams, precision triumphed. 2 walls of water collapsed, flooding the valleys and crippling German industry for weeks. The press called them the Dam Busters. For the men involved, it was a bittersweet victory. 8 of the 19 aircraft never returned. Yet their success proved the Lancaster's versatility. It could deliver accuracy and power beyond imagination. After the Dams raid came other special operations. Lancasters carried the massive 12,000-pound tallboy and 22,000-pound Grand Slam bombs, also designed by Wallace. These were earthquake bombs intended to shake entire structures from their foundations. Only the Lancaster could lift them. No other aircraft in the world had a bomb bay so vast. In 1944, 617 Squadron used tallboys to sink the German battleship Tirpitz, hiding in a Norwegian fjord. They dropped from high altitude with deadly precision. One direct hit turned the 50,000-ton giant on her side. It was one of the most spectacular attacks of the war, achieved not by a fleet, but by a handful of bombers and the men who flew them. Every month brought new modifications. Long-range fuel tanks extended endurance, radar jammers confused enemy defenses, and flame dampers helped them disappear into the night. The aircraft had become a flying laboratory, carrying Britain's best engineers' dreams into combat. Yet for the crews, innovation didn't make the missions any easier. Each sortie meant climbing through a sky lit by fires, feeling the aircraft shudder as flak bursts thumped beneath the wings. They trusted the Lancaster's strength and their own luck. In those years, the bomber was both weapon and symbol, proof that a nation on the defensive could strike deep into the heart of the enemy's empire. The roar of 4 Merlins over Germany became the sound of resistance itself. By late 1943, the Avro Lancaster was a familiar sound over Europe, a deep, rhythmic thunder that filled the night. But with its growing power came questions that history still wrestles with today. What did it mean to fight a war from the sky? And what did it cost to win? Air Chief Marshal Arthur Bomber Harris believed that destroying Germany's industrial heart would shorten the war. In July 1943, he unleashed Operation Gomorrah, the week-long bombardment of Hamburg. Lancasters filled the night from horizon to horizon. They dropped a mix of high-explosive and incendiary bombs, creating winds so fierce they pulled trees from the ground and drew oxygen from the streets below. The result was a firestorm, one of the first in history. 40,000 people died, and the city burned for a week. For the air crews, there was no sense of triumph. Many returned to base silent, staring through smoke-blackened windows. They had done their duty, but they had also seen what duty looked like when it fell on civilians. Lancaster veterans wrote later that the smell of burning cities clung to their clothes long after they landed. The campaign continued through the winter of 1944. Night after night, the bombers flew to Berlin, Leipzig, Nuremberg. Losses were staggering. Over the course of the war, 55,573 men of Bomber Command were killed, more than half of those who served. Every base had its empty bunks, its empty chairs in the mess hall. Each loss meant 7 names crossed off the board, 7 families waiting for a letter that would never arrive. To survive, the crews relied on each other completely. The pilot might never meet his tail gunner outside the aircraft, but in the air, they shared an unspoken bond. A single hit to the fuel tanks, a burst of cannon fire from a night fighter, and the aircraft could become a rolling furnace. Still, they flew. They believed that if they could strike hard enough, the war would end sooner and fewer people would die overall. It was a belief that gave them strength when logic could not. Technological ingenuity kept evolving alongside the moral debate. Electronic countermeasures such as window Thin strips of aluminum foil scattered from the bombers blinded German radar. New navigation aids like Oboe and H-2S Mark III improved accuracy. By 1944, a typical Lancaster raid was a fusion of human skill and machine intelligence, decades ahead of its time. The aircraft itself was changing too. Armor plates were added, turrets improved, and some models received the stronger Packard-built Merlins from American factories. The Lancaster's reliability under that constant strain became legendary. Crews joked that if they were still alive, the aircraft probably was too. In early 1945, with the end approaching, Bomber Command turned to targets that would hasten Germany's collapse: rail lines, oil depots, bridges. And then came Dresden. In February 1945, Lancasters joined American bombers in an attack that devastated one of Europe's most beautiful cities. The moral questions grew louder. Was it revenge? Was it strategy? The men who flew seldom answered. Most simply said they were told the raid would save lives at the front by stopping reinforcements. They did their duty, as they always had, and carried the weight of it for the rest of their lives. When the smoke finally cleared, the Lancasters had helped break Germany's industrial capacity and shorten the war, but at a price that no one would ever forget. Spring 1945. The long nights were finally ending. The Lancaster squadrons that had once taken off in darkness now flew missions of mercy, dropping food to starving civilians in Holland and flying supplies to liberated prisoners of war. For the first time in years, their bomb bays carried life instead of destruction. When Germany surrendered in May, crews celebrated quietly. There was relief, but also disbelief. For those who had survived, the silence after years of engine thunder felt almost wrong. Many looked around at the empty bunks and understood the price of victory. In all, more than 7,300 Lancasters were built. Over 3,000 were lost in combat. Each loss meant 7 men. Each surviving aircraft represented hundreds of hours of human labor. Builders, armorers, mechanics, and aircrew united by the same purpose. After the war, the bomber that had once symbolized destruction found new roles. Some Lancasters became photographic survey aircraft, mapping a world now at peace. Others served as search and rescue platforms, dropping lifeboats to ships in distress. A few tested early jet engines and radar systems, bridging the gap between the propeller age and the jet age that followed. By the early 1950s, most had been scrapped, their aluminum recycled into the civilian boom they had helped to make possible. But a handful escaped the cutter's torch. Museums and veterans groups began restoring them, realizing that this aircraft was more than a machine. It was living history. Today, only 2 airworthy Lancasters remain: PA-474 of the RAF's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight and FM-213 of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. When they fly together, separated by an ocean but joined by memory, they create a sound unlike anything else on Earth. 4 Merlins, 16 pistons each, beating in perfect time, an echo of courage. Crowds fall silent as the big bomber passes overhead. You can feel the vibration in your chest before you hear it in your ears. Veterans often weep. Children stare wide-eyed. It is not just noise. It is the heartbeat of history. Inside museums, visitors walk through the narrow fuselage, past the cold metal seat where a gunner once sat, past the map table still marked with pencil lines. They imagine the fear, the exhaustion, the determination. They realize that this aircraft, built by ordinary people, carried extraordinary hope. Historians now see the Lancaster as both symbol and question. It helped end tyranny, but it also forced humanity to confront the ethics of total war. It showed how technology can magnify both courage and consequence. Yet for all the debate, one truth endures. Those who flew the Lancaster believed they were fighting so that others would never have to. They faced the dark so that dawn could come again. When PA-474 climbs into the golden light of an English evening and the sound rolls across the fields, it carries every story. The engineers, the factory girls, the air crew who never came home. It carries the lesson that progress and sacrifice are forever intertwined. And as its silhouette fades into the distance, we remember not just the power of the machine, but the humanity of those who built and flew it. Because the Avro Lancaster was never just a bomber. It was a promise, forged in fire, that even in the darkest hours, people can rise together and light the sky. Thanks so much for listening and watching my content. I hope you really enjoyed. Hope to see you in the next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn post notifications on.